Plywood presents Zim Ugochukwu.
July 1st, 2024. A few years ago, you embarked on a journey. And you didn't know it then, but this was the one experience that changed the trajectory of your life. You left the familiar comforts of home and traveled thousands of miles to meet people you didn't know. And I know you were scared, but you tried new things with new people. You laughed, you danced, you prayed, you explored, but most importantly, you lived. And I hope you saw it then, but in that week, you became the person you were always meant to be. You were confronted with dreams you never knew you had. And for the first time, you realized exactly what you wanted out of life. You wanted to be whole. You wanted to be free. You wanted to find meaning. And I want you to remember how life was then, because I'm here to remind you that there is no time limit to reinvention. And I'm so proud that you decided then to do this for you, because right now, almost a decade later, you're exactly where you need to be.
Hey, y'all. Hello. Okay, so I have my notes here because I tend to ramble quite a bit, so this is just to keep me on track. What you're going to learn in this session is my formula for effective brand building, how storytelling transformed my business, and the community first, product second methodology. What you saw were our small group experiences. So we ran group experiences all around the world. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And since we are going to spend a little bit of time together today, is it okay if I tell you a little bit more about who I am? All right, let's do it. So, not many people know this, but I just turned 30. So I like to consider myself, thank you. I like to consider myself a forever 20-er. I loved my 20s. I absolutely loved my 20s. But let's take a trip down memory lane. I have two stories for you. The first story takes you through how I grew up and why I started Travel Noire. And the second story walks you through about a year before I launched my company. So, when I was 4 years old, a tragedy happened in my family that would shape the rest of my life. And I didn't know it then, but my mother found my father's hidden gun. And in an arranged marriage that was physically, emotionally, mentally, and financially abusive, she began to plan her own escape. So by the time my father came back from his next business trip, we were gone. I took my first cross-country road trip, and along the way, we were robbed, we were put in shelters, and we were put on welfare. And as a result, my childhood consisted of a lot of back and forth until I ended up here in Rochester, Minnesota. And at an early age, I had to get comfortable with being different because there weren't very many kids who looked like me. I was used to being unconventional. So I went off to college and I dabbled in a lot of other unconventional things. When I was 19 years old, I cloned a gene with similarities to a genetic disorder. And I was the youngest precinct judge in the state of North Carolina. I was 19 years old at the time. And among other things, it was during my college years that I got my start with organizing communities both on and offline. I created an organization to open a civil rights museum, and I helped to lead the youngest anti-tobacco organization in the United States. So when an opportunity came across my desk for me to live and work abroad, I jumped at the chance to be able to apply what I'd learned about organizing communities to an international setting. So once I'd gotten that fellowship, I did what any normal college graduate would do. I sold everything that I owned and I moved to India. But what I found while I was there was deeply troubling. It was really terrifying. On my first night in India, and every single night for the year plus that I was there, I faced this. And it was that being as dark as I was, skin complexion, it was something to be ashamed of. It was that being different was something to hide. So I went searching for answers, and I wound up living on a train. Now, this experience was the most challenging experience that I'd ever encountered in my young, I think I was 22 at the time. I lived on a train with 450 other 20-somethings, all passionate about changing the face of India. And we would stop every single morning at 5 a.m. to shadow a social entrepreneur for the day. I heard familiar struggles, I listened to familiar stories, and I sang familiar songs with people from all around the world. And my new Indian friends shared their struggle of color with me, and I wanted to take this message to the world. But from my friends back home, I kept hearing the same things. It was that this world isn't safe for people who look like us. I don't see anyone who looks like me doing it, and Black people just don't travel there. For the record, I am somebody that will travel to anywhere, any country that is not war-torn. But a lot of people that I know are not as risky as I am. And they tell me that this is the story that they've been fed for decades and decades and decades, and it was that they couldn't travel, that it wasn't meant for them to explore, that it was too expensive. People were being sold the wrong story, and at times, I was guilty of believing that as well. So we started with a very simple idea, and we began to show people themselves. And a really cool thing happened. People started to respond. They sent us pictures of themselves in Morocco and in Thailand. They sent us photos of them in Portugal, in South Africa, in Indonesia and Uganda, in Egypt and in Brazil, in France, and even in Antarctica. We brought on 100 content creators to share their own travel stories on travelnoire.com. We moved into instructional programming like how to launch your global career, how to get paid to travel, and so much more. We built a completely distributed team so my team could work and live wherever in the world they felt the most productive and the most happy. And we would share our very unconventional philosophy of life and travel with the world. People began to see themselves in places that people told them that they couldn't go. And that changed everything. Before I started Travel Noire, I would look at magazines, look at travel magazines, and I would never see my face anywhere in it. I was the subject. I was never the person visiting. And that was deeply troubling to me, and I know that there were a lot of other people who saw and felt the very same things, being in spaces where everybody else didn't necessarily look like you, or they told you that this wasn't a place where you belonged. So last year, I ended up selling my company, and I currently manage the brand in its newest merged form with Blavity, which is a news media company based in Los Angeles. And so these days, I get to travel the world and really share what I'm passionate about, and I'm able to work, to kind of carry that philosophy of working from anywhere with me as well. I can live a balanced life, finally. I know a lot of you all are entrepreneurs. Get ready for the ride, because it is a ride. But having sold my company, I see a shift, right? I'm able to have a more balanced life. I'm able to rest more. I'm able to eat healthier. I'm able to eat. I am able to just pray more and just be more grounded, and I really cherish that. But it was not always this way. In 2012, I moved to one of the most expensive cities in the world, and I had a few $100s in my bank account and a $3 a day budget. Your girl was broke. I had 4 different jobs, and I was constantly overdrafting my bank accounts. I was like, I had to choose between the bus fare and eating. I mean, it was like struggle central. And I can tell you now that that was not a good place for me to live. And when I started my company, I also had a full-time job. And I ended up working myself into a hospital because I was just working all the time. I never rested, and I was always working because somehow society tells us that we have to have this like hustle or die mentality, like work forever, never sleep, like wake up and just do all of these things that are not natural to who we are. And it wasn't until I joined a mastermind with a personal mentor of mine, Jeff Walker, he's in the right corner there, that I understood the difference between working for your business and having your business work for you. And so I finally then started to understand what freedom meant in business. I started to take flex weeks. So these are periods of time where I would just take off for pure inspiration. I took more vacations, and I began letting my business work for me. I met other 7, 8, and 9-figure entrepreneurs who made a practice out of really being grounded and rooted in their brand and in their stories. We had unlimited vacations. My team had unlimited vacations because I so strongly believed in the value of rest. When we had a very tiny team of 4, Fast Company named us as one of the most innovative companies in the world. And I found this out on Twitter, and I was shocked. I was named as Forbes 30 under 30 and was handpicked by Oprah as one of the Super Soul 100, a collection of leaders, thinkers, and teachers elevating humanity. My company, as a result of the work that we were doing, has been consistently featured in top-tier press, like New York Times, Time Magazine, CBS This Morning, etc. And at the time of sale, we were reaching about 2 million travelers every single month, and we had about 700,000 followers across our platforms, and we were doing multiple 7 figures in revenue. And so, as you saw a little bit before, in the video, we craft small group experiences around the world for travelers who are at a place in their life where they just need to be, they need space to think about something. So they're either about to go from one job to the next, they're in a period of transition. So before the sale, I built a team that ran about 60 different trips a year across 5 continents. So that previous picture was in Bali, this is in Zanzibar, and each itinerary featured a private photographer as well as localized immersive experiences, and it was all 7 days and 6 nights. We also have a membership subscription based on the idea that you can learn how to travel any way that you want. So the people that are on this platform, they want to move abroad, they want to learn how to get paid to travel. They are in various travel stages in their own journey. And so we created content specifically for them, and they receive this content every single week. Now, I will tell you that Travel Noire would not have been the company that it is had I not had the experiences that I had growing up, being the only person, being the other, or traveling to places that people just didn't go. Travel Noire would not be that kind of risky company that it is now. So that's enough about me, because I talked a lot, and I want to talk about you for a little bit. I want to talk about building your business and building it with the end in mind. So this isn't just about exiting or IPOing, it's bigger than that, right? So often founders will look at different companies and they'll say, I want to be like that company, I want to be like that company, but they haven't started with themselves, right? Are you capable of running a company that will IPO? Is that in your personality type? Do you not like people? Do you love people? These are all things that should go into thinking about how big or how small you want to grow your company. Your business should not kill you. I think that society has put so much of an emphasis on the way that we work that people feel like if I'm not always working 24/7, then I'm a failure. It's about who you are. Right? So I talked about building a business with the end in mind, and really identifying your ethos. We all started companies because we wanted to serve. We identified a need in the market, and we wanted to create something that we believed would improve somebody's life, save them money, or the like. So Travel Noire was an extension of me, right? It's an extension of who I am. And the hardest thing that I've had to do in my role as Chief Brand Officer of Travel Noire after selling it is take everything that's in my head and in my heart and putting it out on paper. Because Travel Noire was so much of who I was. I didn't want to work in an office, so we didn't have an office. I wanted to be able to travel, so I built a travel company. It was who I was at its core. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the brand starter formula. And this is how I like to think about business success. So at the base, you have dimensions and intentions. So this is the size of the company. This is the size of your team. This is how much you want to work. I know entrepreneurs who work 10 hours a week, and they make a ton of money. And then I know entrepreneurs who work more than that. There's a spectrum there. Then the next thing is need and customer. What need are you solving? Who is your ideal customer? What are their fears, their joys? Who are they? We knew so much about our customers. It was nuts. It was crazy. The next block here is community engagement. Now, this is key, building a community of people who can engage with the brand and each other. Will you do this through a value sequence, through email communication, through audience testing, et cetera? And then you have product. So notice that product is not at the bottom. I think a lot of entrepreneurs start with product first when they should start with all of these other things before they build their product. And at the top, you have success, right? So knowing more, not less about your customers is what will get you quicker results. It completely transformed my business 100%, knowing exactly who our customers were. Now, as we launched Travel Noire Experiences, which are our small group trips, we got really deep into understanding who they were and what they wanted out of life. We wanted to speak directly to them. These were premium price trips, so all in together was about $4,000 to $5,000 per trip. So that was the price point. When we launched this was, after some time really digging into the avatar, I can't remember how many spaces we launched, but we sold out of those in less than 90 minutes. And it's a testament to the fact that we really tried to understand who we were serving. So I want to quickly talk about this community value sequence that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and how I think entrepreneurs get it wrong when they start product first, right? So the community value sequence is a market-ready strategy that quickly grows a clearly defined select group of individuals and turns them into raving fans. And it looks a little bit like this. It's value, conversion, value, relationship building, value, and then you sell to them. So when I started Travel Noire, we didn't make any money for the first 18 months. And that was not because we didn't want to, but I was very, very intentional about building community first so that when we did launch something, people bought, right? So every single product we've brought to market, they've all sold out because we first placed an emphasis on building a community. We didn't spend a dime on external marketing until our third year. I sold Travel Noire in year 4. So again, this goes to really focusing on your community first, and then selling to them and letting them do the work, letting them refer your brand to other people. So if we did not start community first, if we started building our product first, it would have just been extremely expensive, right? I know a couple brands who go straight from idea validation to paid advertising, and they end up losing more money because they have not yet validated that idea. But if you start community first, you're able to test against your community for whatever it is that you want to launch. Now, when I started my company, as I mentioned, we focused on giving tons of value. So we did master classes, we had seminars. We did that for almost 2 years. We grew our list to over 50,000 subscribers. And I mentioned that we didn't make any money for those first 2 years. And so when we started selling, we ended up making $1 million in that first year with over a 50% profit margin. And that was based on this concept of building community first and not focusing on your product. Product adoption without community is very difficult and it's extremely expensive. So if you don't get anything from me today, don't build your business before you build your community. That's really, really important. Now, this next thing that I want to talk about is the narrative syndrome. So this is what happens when your brand cannot clearly tell its story, right? You can't clearly tell your competitive story. Every story has to be clear. It's the way that our brain works. Our brain focuses on clarity and away from clutter, right? So as entrepreneurs, we tend to be at a level 7. We talk about all the bits and bobs and all these things, but a consumer will buy at a level 1. They only want to know like the very rudimentary things that will help transform their own lives. And we have to be able to get from a 7 down to a 1. Now, this is a phrase that I love because I think it's so important. It's not about who has the better product, it's about who tells the better story. You can have a brand that's a competitor to you, and if they can tell what they do in a more simpler way than you can, they will always win in the marketplace. Always, always, always. So I wanted to also talk about people who do not buy things. Generally, people don't buy things that they don't understand, right? So if I don't understand something, I'm not buying it. If I have too many choices, I'm not making any choices whatsoever, right? And so if we think about storytelling and we think about really trying to connect with our audience, you have to understand that story is such an important part of your business. You have to be able to tell it in a clear and succinct way. I want to talk about Apple for just a second. I'm almost finished. Apple is one of my favorite brands, but a couple of years ago, decades ago actually, they started to talk about, Steve Jobs he put an ad in the newspaper. And in this newspaper, it was all of the bits and all of the bobs of the computer, the supercomputer, right? It had like a huge spread. It was like, I'm not a computer geek, so forgive me, I'm gonna say all the wrong things, but it had like a 200 megabit processor, and it had like all these different things, and sales tanked. They absolutely tanked. And then a couple years later, decades later, they came back with 2 words. Does anybody know what those words were? Think different. 2 words. This was an aspirational shift, right? We're gonna help you as a brand think different. And that can mean whatever it means to you personally. But Steve Jobs went from a 7 all the way to a 1. It was no longer about showing all the inside gadgets and technological bits and bobs or whatever to the consumer. It was about telling them how they could actually transform that particular person. This is an example that I like to use, not being political, but I normally go out into the audience, so I'm going to choose just one person. I want you to tell me, I'm looking at you, give me a campaign promise from Hillary Clinton. Okay, all right, so I want you to give me, in the pink shirt, a campaign promise from Donald Trump.
Make America great.
Make America great, build a wall. Here's the thing. It's not about who has a better product. It's not about who's the better candidate. It's about who can tell a better story, who can tell a simpler story, right? I like to use that as an example because a lot of people don't see the correlation, right? If you look at President Trump, you see that he'll talk in like very short kind of sound bites, things that you can remember. And so I always like to use that as an example because I think it's very interesting. And then one day, you wake up, and this was my story. You wake up and you feel led to sell your company, right? I sold Travel Noire, not expecting to sell it at all. I went into the year thinking that my brand was gonna be something that I was gonna have forever and ever and ever. But God told me to give it up. And I had to come to a place where I knew when it was time to walk away. And there will be times like this for all of you. There will be seasons like this for all of you where you have to shed, right? And you have to bloom, and then that flower will die. And then it'll start all over again. And it's always a new thing. It's always a new cycle. And it's important to remember that it doesn't mean that you failed. It just means that you're on a different journey, right? You're going somewhere different. And so for me, I had to recognize that because Travel Noire was an extension of self, it was an extension of who I was, it was painful to let that company go. But it was a part of this blooming process about doing whatever it was that God called me to do. And so I want you all to think about that. I talked a lot about my story. I talked about why story is important. And I want you all to remember that if it is ever time for you all to walk away from anything, whether you're walking away from your businesses, whether you're walking away from relationships as you build your businesses, that is okay. It's all a part of the process. Thank you.